Thank you, everyone. And I know disability can be a difficult conversation to listen to at the end of the day. You've already heard so much. And before I get into my presentation, I just wanted to I know Dr. Hall mentioned this earlier, talking about Unicure, but HDSA, Help for HD, HD Reach, HDF, and HDOO have all come together to launch a unified petition urging the FDA to uphold its commitments. So every single person in this room can take action by going to HDSA's website, www.hdsa.org, and signing the petition to get the FDA to reconsider Unicure. Just wanted to shout that out since that's come up today. Okay. So what I'm going to be talking about today is really the timeline of disability. But first, before I get into that, I just kind of want to talk about this concept of the disability umbrella. And this is something that I have created because disability isn't just a financial benefit, especially with something like Huntington's disease, it becomes a way of life. And so all of these things that are on the screen, genetic rights, work accommodations, disability insurance benefits, other insurances, health insurance, long-term care, legal documents, and financial planning, all of these things really fall under the disability umbrella. These are all things that the HD community needs help with that impact somebody along their journey. So it's important to recognize what disability really means. It's not just Social Security disability. It is so much more than that. And it's really important to have these conversations and to understand why disability is important because it does require planning. It requires understanding the processes. Should have picked a better word. Because there's a lot that goes into it. And because there's a lot of legal financial planning that goes into it, you can miss your window of opportunity for applying for things. Social Security disability benefits expire if you've been out of work for too long. If you don't sign up for benefits through your employer in time, you may not have access to them. And if you don't sign up for employer provided benefits, it means you could go the entire waiting period for Social Security without any income. And that's not realistic for a lot of individuals. And preparing in advance means it can help expedite the benefit application process. It can help you get approved for benefits, and it can help you better understand and describe your symptoms and limitations for yourself, your loved ones, your care providers. And it can help you advocate for yourself. Advocating for yourself is not an innate skill. It is something you have to practice. And the reality is in the HD community, if you or your loved one has HD, you are going to spend every day of the rest of your life advocating. And I know this is a topic that is not sexy. No one's clamoring to learn more about disability, but this isn't going anywhere. It's something that's important. And this is really all about making sure every single person in this room and everybody in the HD community can have the best life today, the best day to day while we're waiting for these research, all of these drugs that are coming down the pipeline that we learned about this morning. But we want to make sure everybody has the best day to day life possible. So this is a timeline of in an ideal world, if everyone did the advanced planning and had access to all the things, this is what it would look like. So pre-symptomatic HD pre-symptomatic HD would kind of be like the planning stage. So if you know you're gene positive or you know you're at risk for the disease, you start putting things in place. You research financial, legal, and disability options. You take the new benefits that are provided from your employer. You look into things that you may be eligible for. And certain insurance things like life insurance, that is something that changes as you move through life. If you're a young single individual and you don't have anybody, you don't have any debt, you don't have anybody you need to inherit something, you don't necessarily need life insurance at that point. But if you're planning, if you want to have a family or if you have siblings that you love and would want them to have something when you pass away, that's when life insurance can be part of the conversation. But a lot of this stuff, it's good to think about it, but it still does change as you move through life. But the big thing is to start planning as soon as possible, or at least thinking about it, or putting the basics in place. Because once you get to early mid-stage HD, let's say you can't work anymore, that's the action stage. You want to already take advantage of the disability benefits that you know exist. You want to know how to move through the Social Security system so you can get through it as quickly as possible. And that's when you put the legal and financial documents in place. That's when you want to have a power of attorney. You want to have a will or an estate plan. So by the time you get to late stage HD, I call this the benefit stage, it means you use the benefits you already have in place. You don't have to scramble to get things or to protect your loved one. You don't want to have to be scrambling to get guardianship and pay $10,000 out of pocket so they can get the care that they need. And just transition to whatever care plan you have, whether it's staying at home, whether it's being transferred to a facility. But it means all your ducks have been in a row. So instead of scrambling to do something, you know what the next step is. Um, so within the disability timeline that I'm going to talk about today, just giving a general information about some of the supplemental insurances, but phase one is work accommodations because work accommodations is a really important part of the disability process. And then applying for the short-term or long-term disability benefits, and then applying for Social Security disability. So it's good to understand health and other supplemental insurances, what they mean for you, where you're at, and why you want them. And these are the things, if you don't prepare in advance, you will lose out on them. Because unfortunately, genetic discrimination is alive and well. And for most insurance carriers, if you are gene positive, you will lose the ability to get anything other than health insurance. The Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act protects your right to health insurance and protects your right to employment, but it doesn't protect your right to any other kind of insurance. So those are things you need to get in place first. A lot of people assume that Social Security disability is an easy process. I have no idea why. But right now, the national average for a decision is 8 months. That doesn't mean it's a positive decision. You could get denied. It could take you 18 months to get disability. Can anybody in this room go 18 months without any kind of income? And so do not depend solely on Social Security disability. And it's important to understand the three different types of these benefits, so public benefits, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, private benefits, Aflac, Lincoln Financial, Liberty, Prudential, all of those things. And then employer provided benefits. Those are the equivalent of a private benefit, but it's paid for by your employer. And these are good because it's easier to get employer provided benefits because they have to be accessible from everybody at the company. So they're not going to ask about your genetic information. And it is even one of those things, like let's say you are gene positive and you decide to change companies, you can still get long-term disability benefits through that company, especially if you pay for that whole wait period. Like if you change companies and you try to apply for long-term disability this first 6 months of working there, you're definitely going to get denied. But if you change companies and like work at that new company for 5 years, it shouldn't be a problem to get those long-term disability benefits at that point. Private benefits give you more flexibility and coverage, and there's all these things called riders, which is stuff you can attach to a claim. Like you would want to speak to a specialized insurance broker because they know all the ins and outs of this and all the different things that you could get, but those are more expensive. The employer provided benefits are usually subsidized by the employer, and it's at least good baseline coverage. The downside is not every employer provides it, and it's only based on your current employment. But these are things like this is stuff I preach to everybody because this is stuff everyone should be taking when they get their first job, if they offer benefits and understanding what this means. You never know what may happen. As a good millennial, I've watched Mean Girls and I was taught we could get hit by a bus tomorrow. You just don't know. And so it is important to plan for these things. And like as I have two small kids myself. We don't have maternity leave. I had to make sure I paid into short-term disability so I could get paid time off after I had my kids. So those are other reasons to think about some of these things. And you really want to know your options. I'll talk about it more in a second, but it's also to know what system you pay into. Most Americans pay into Social Security. Some may pay into a state employer program. Some people are teachers. You pay into different programs. So I should have looked this up and I apologize. But for a lot of states, there's a public employee retirement system. So if you're a teacher in the state of Illinois, you could pay into that instead of Social Security. So you're never going to be eligible for Social Security disability benefits. You'd be eligible for disability through, usually it'd be like IPERS, Illinois' public employee retirement system. And it is important to know what you're paying into. Short term, understanding the difference between disability, their short-term and long-term. It's important to understand that because if you're getting benefits, especially from your employer, some may only offer short-term, some may only offer long-term, but if they offer both, it's because the short-term is the equivalent of the waiting period for the long term. So if you know you've reached the point where you can't work anymore, you're honestly going to take all of these things. You apply for short term first, then you apply for the long term benefits, but it's supposed to help you get paid through that whole process. Short term can last anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months. Short-term disability is really easy to get approved for. It's this really short form for you, a short form for your employer, and a short form for your doctor. Like most people don't have difficulty getting short-term disability. It can be a little longer to get long-term disability, depending on what your policy says. Some say you just have to show you can't do the current job you're doing. Some say you have to show you can't do any job, which is closer to Social Security. Uh, and then again, I mentioned this just a second ago, but the employer funded retirement and disability. So there are some people who pay into Social Security and an employer funded program. So the federal government does this, some state government jobs do this. But some states have their own short term disability program. Illinois does not, so I'm not going to talk about that. But it is really important if you're a teacher or if you're a state employee and for whatever reason you don't intend to stay there. Let's say you get your first job teaching in Illinois, but you know you're not going to stay here forever and it's paying into a public education retirement system. You can't pay into that public education retirement system because if you only work here for 5 years, and let's say you go to Nebraska and work there for 5 years and then go to Ohio and work there for 5 years, you're not going to be eligible for disability in any of those states. Most states require you work there for 10 years. So if you know you're going to be a teacher and you're not committed somewhere long term, which that's not how teaching usually works, but you want to pay into a different kind of retirement plan that moves with you. So if you do become disabled, you have access to that. Because unfortunately, I have seen situations where someone was a teacher and worked in a bunch of different states, but you can't add on the different states together. You have to meet the criteria in that individual state. And if you don't, you're left without options, or you have to try to get supplemental security income, which is really hard, especially if you're married. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about work accommodations. So this is really the first step in the process because HD is a progressive condition. Most of the time, it's not you wake up one morning and you're like, I just can't do this. I don't want to do it anymore. There can be signs and other issues that start happening at work. And a lot of individuals can continue working. And so if you're starting to struggle and if there's been any like write-ups at work or having any issues at work, you can use the Americans with Disabilities Act and request reasonable accommodations as long as you can provide or prove. As long as you can perform your essential job tasks. Only you know what that means. Like, hopefully you have a job description. Granted, I don't know how many of us in this room actually perform what our job description is, but that's a baseline. But you cannot be guaranteed any protections if you do not disclose to your employer that you have a disabling condition. So if you have never disclosed to them that you have HD or any kind of medical condition, or if you're experiencing any kind of health condition and you're having trouble performing your job, you can be legally fired. And that is a personal decision because while this is how the law is supposed to work, there are because employers have a lot of flexibility in what is a reasonable accommodation. They can deny it. And it does really help if when you're asking for a reasonable accommodation, you go to your employer with ideas in mind. You don't want to give them the power to decide what you can or cannot do. You want to go to them with like, hey, these are some possible accommodations that would work for me. You want to start that negotiation. And sometimes that negotiation does end and we think you need to go out on disability. But for some people, it definitely is worth trying. And it can be hard to determine what accommodations you need. This is sometimes I'll tell you to work with your clinical care team. They know your symptoms and limitations. And again, you should probably bring in a job description and maybe you can work together to like talk through it, have someone to talk it through with. There's also I wish I had put it on here. There's a really great organization called the Job Accommodation Network, JAN. They have a whole page dedicated to Huntington's disease. They have samples for how to request work accommodation letters. They have a lot of really great information and ideas for what kind of accommodations you could request. And A question I get a lot is who do I speak to about getting these accommodations? If you have a human resources person or team or department, you'll need to talk to them, but you'll also need to talk to your immediate supervisor and manager, anybody who is managing your ability to do your day-to-day tasks. It's going to be a collaborative effort. And you will need to provide some medical documentation to show that you do need these accommodations. And give everyone all this information, but you know your situation best. I know there are some situations where you just know that your employer is not gonna go for this. So asking for accommodations is gonna be you risking your job. And there are some employers who will bend over backwards to let you work there as long as humanly possible, even if you were hired to be an accountant, but now all you can do is manage the snack drawer. I have seen that. Um, and so you know those things best. Like you have, like it is your legal right to ask for these things. But as a lawyer, I know how things written on paper don't always play out like that in real life. And you get to make the decision. I just give you this information so you are empowered to make the decisions that are best for you. And it is important to kind of keep track of warning signs. And I know when we're talking about that in HD, it can be hard because there's issues with insight and awareness sometimes. And if it's your loved one who has HD and they haven't been talking to you about how work is going, or you don't have any idea, and all of a sudden they come home one day and they're fired or they have a write-up, it can be harder to keep track of that. Um, but things to start looking for, like inability to perform tasks, trouble interacting with coworkers and supervisors, difficulty attending work and concentrating. If you're taking more breaks, if you come home and just go to bed every night because you cannot do it anymore. If you have trouble holding a job consistently, you can get a new job, but you can't work it for very long. If you haven't worked in over 12 months and you're making less than $7,000 a year, the not working in over 12 months, the inconsistency in jobs and the not earning very much, that's when you're starting to impact your Social Security credits. Your credits are how you're eligible for disability and retirement. So if you're only making $3,000 a year, you're right on the cusp of losing eligibility for your Social Security because you have to simplify it, you have to have worked 5 out of the last 10 years, or you have to have 20 quarters of credits. So if you're not getting all of your credits for the year, you're coming really close to not being eligible for disability anymore. And we don't want that. I have seen too many HD families lose out on Social Security disability, which is the more stable, better benefit program because they lost their work credits. So if you've come time that you've decided you don't want to work anymore, um, then if your employer does have short-term and long-term disability benefits, you start by working with them. You can't just stop coming to work and not apply for anything. You will just get fired. So you do. One of my friends is an employment law attorney, and he gets to ask all the time, I stopped going to work. Is that a problem for my claim? And he's just like, it's been a week. Yeah, a little bit. So it is important to know you can't just like stop showing up. You do have to have the conversations. And you don't ever have to fully disclose to your employer that it's Huntington's disease. You can sometimes like the federal government asks very specific questions and requires like the specific diagnosis on some forms. But sometimes you can have a little bit more wiggle room. You can say like, I have been diagnosed with a medical condition. It is impacting my work. I've reached the point that I need to stop working. I'm going to take short-term disability. And what gets confusing is short-term and long-term disability can protect your job, but ultimately, if you're never going to go back to work, you do have to have the conversation like, I'm going to take these benefits, but my employment does need to cease. Because you can be employed still and apply for Social Security and all of these things, but you're not actively working. But at some point, you will have to terminate your employment officially, and that is company and job dependent. Um, and it is important to talk about if you're self-employed, you do need to create an exit plan for yourself. And it's probably harder if you're self-employed, but you do need to put those things in place. Like as an attorney, we're told all the time, like especially if you have your own practice, you have to have a plan in place if something happens, like you just die or you medically can't partake in it. Like there's stuff that has to be put in place, especially if you want that income or just it's probably not great for you if this is income you rely on and you just stop doing it one day. Um, but yeah, so what is an exit plan? For self-employed, wrapping up business operations or transferring the business to someone else, deciding your last day of work, creating support team for disability process, and informing relevant people. And that's pretty similar as an exit plan if you're employed somewhere. One of the things that is really important in this process is making sure you have a support team and informing the relevant people, which includes your lovely staff at Rush and Northwestern and your social workers and anybody who's going to sit there and help complete the application with you, friends, coworkers. You know, this is not something that you can do alone. This is something you very much need to have a team, a supportive team around you. Like I said earlier, short-term disability is pretty quick. These are very simple forms. Really, the biggest hangup with like social security or short-term disability is making sure you get the form back, the medical form back from the doctor and actually submit it to the insurance company. If they don't have the like medical release and get the medical records, they can't process your claim. And then for long-term disability, the processing time is anywhere from 45 to 105 days. And with short-term disability, usually you get one lump sum check. And then long-term disability, I think it will depend on your policy. Maybe it's biweekly, maybe it's monthly, but that'll be built into your policy. So one of the things that I get a lot is when should I stop working or when do I qualify for disability benefits? And the answer is it depends. I know us lawyers are annoying. The answer is always it depends. But it does. It depends on your policy. It depends on what benefit you're applying for because every policy has its own definition. And so you need to understand the definitions of these policies to know what you have to show. But the big thing is all of the policies are looking for how it impacts your ability to work. And they do consider like your activities of daily living and your functional activities in that. Because if you're starting to have issues with some of these functional activities, it is going to show up in how you work. But you have to, the general definition across everything is you have to have a diagnosed medical condition that prevents you from working. And I'm assuming most of the people in this room under like fall under the diagnosed, oh my gosh, medical condition criteria. But it's one of those things. So I actually saw a case recently. Someone had done genetic testing, but all they had done was genetic testing, and Social Security sent a denial that said, we couldn't approve your claim. You don't have a medical diagnosis because a standalone gene test was not a medical diagnosis and it wasn't from a medical institution. And that's important to know too. Just having a positive gene test is not enough for disability under any circumstances. But your medical record has to contain well-documented proof of your HD symptoms and limitations. There is no magic combination of symptoms because it's different for everyone. But the reality is cognitive and behavioral symptoms are the leading reason people stop working. But this is also why you need to be open and honest with your clinical care team. You need to tell them if you're starting to struggle with work, if you're considering disability, because they will work with you. They will notate things in your medical records differently because what Social Security and disability needs to see is different from what insurance companies and doctors need to see for themselves. So if you give them the heads up, they can make the changes that can help you get approved for disability. Again, applying for disability is like similar for asking for accommodations, work with human resources, work with your supervisor and manager, and then you will need to provide medical documentation. And again, you don't provide the medical documentation to the employer. It's going to be whoever is reviewing the claim. So, Lincoln Financial, Prudential, whoever the disability company is. And you just have to comply with what their rules and regulations are. And essentially, you have to show that you can no longer perform your job because of your medical condition, because of your Huntington's disease. This is like a little infographic I created. I hope that helps. But you can see how everything kind of stacks on top of each other. It's not a standalone process. It all goes together. So when you're thinking about stopping work, decide the last day of work. You will need to put in time for sick time or PTO. The first week of being disabled doesn't, like, that's a wait period for short-term disability, so you will need to use sick time first. Then when completing the short-term disability application, the employee form, the employer form, and a physician form. Long-term disability application, you don't want to wait for the wait period on your short-term disability to run out. If you know you're going to apply for long-term, you want to do it as soon as possible so you don't have to wait like 100 days after your short-term disability stops for your long-term disability to stop. And then while all this is taking place, once you've gotten those things done, then you start the Social Security disability application because that is the most difficult. It takes the most time and you can backdate it. You can backdate that to the day that you stopped working. So it can cover all of the time shown in this infographic. And blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, my thought just left. It's hot. It's the end of the day. But this just shows how everything works together. Short-term disability, long-term disability, state disability, FMLA, none of those count as work earnings for Social Security disability purposes. They all stack on top of each other. Social Security for SSDI purposes only cares about the income you actively earn from actively working. Nothing else matters. You could win the lottery. You could win $20 million. Doesn't matter. Won't impact your SSDI benefits. You may decide to be like, I don't need this no more at that point and move to Europe, but that's personal choice. And then like if you're at the point where you're applying for Social Security disability, this is where you really do need to seriously consider legal decision making. And I always like to throw this in because if you're completing a power of attorney, you have all the control. You get to decide who, what, when, where, why, who's going to help take care of this stuff, what decisions they can make, what they can do. You hold all the control when you have the capacity to make this document. And you can decide who is first in line, who's second in line, who's a backup. You get to control that. And you want to sign a durable power of attorney because that will last whether you become incapacitated or not. If you don't have a power of attorney, or if you don't have a durable power of attorney, and it gets to the point where someone loses capacity, then the only other option is to just let them be, let the train wreck happen, or you have to get guardianship. A durable power of attorney, depending on your needs, you could possibly get one for free. I know the state of Illinois has one on their bar website you can fill out for free, and that's going to meet all the needs because it's from the Illinois State Bar. But guardianship can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. It can be a fight. It can be a process. And that's something you don't want to have to do if your loved one is in a crisis, but they haven't put any of these other documents in place, so you can't legally help them. So you control if you make the power of attorney when you like, that's something you want to have. It's not giving rights away. It's solidifying all the decisions you want made for yourself. I don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to try to go through Social Security quickly. And you do not have to read this whole thing, but I put the Social Security Act up here because Social Security, like, it is literally determined, the process is set by federal law. This isn't just something you apply because you think you're going to get it snapped just like that. This is a whole process. It is set by federal law, and there are very, very specific parameters. And my job exists. Like, I have done all this work. I've built this disability program because all of this stuff is incredibly difficult to navigate, and I want it to be accessible for families. Social Security has very specifically made it difficult to navigate. They don't announce updates. They don't make it easy to find information. They don't tell you what you really need to know. They don't tell you what they're actually looking for when you fill out their forms. They make it tricky. They make it complicated for families. They're alphabetically challenged. Compassionate allowance. And Huntington's disease is actually listed as adult onset Huntington's disease. It's listed as letter A. If you go to the compassionate allowance list, it's not listed under H. No Social Security employee knows that. Every time I talk to a family, they're like, they couldn't find it. Don't get me started. But when we're thinking about the disability process, again, it's important to realize there is a lot of complexity in this. Be aware of that. Familiarize yourself with the process, work with your clinical care team, find a support network for you. Understand what Social Security is looking for in Huntington's disease. Let me see. There's listing 11.17, not my favorite because it requires marked physical limitation. Most people don't have that. This is the listing that really is a slam dunk for most people with HD because it's the neurocognitive decline. But that's a conversation to have with your doctors. That's not something you have to know, but it does help to put that in your application. Um, I messed that up. Oh, that's why I messed that slide up. But Social Security can take a very long time. Important to know, burden of proof is on you. It's your responsibility to manage your claim. Credits expire. Keep going. Nope, keep going. Submit medical evidence with your claim. Again, you cannot get approved without it. And it has to be thorough. So you have to be open and honest with your doctors. And clinical, we've talked about clinical trials. It is important to know clinical trial records don't count. Those are closed things. So if you're participating in a clinical trial, you need to make a regular appointment with your neurological team because clinical trial records do not count. If that's all you've been getting care through, it's like you haven't been getting care at all. Oh my God. Do not complete the application alone. I know I've said that a lot. Complete the application from the perspective of a bad day. The disability application is a dark, scary forest. It is not a place for hope. It is a place for unbridled honesty. And it's hard and it sucks. The hope is getting approved, but if you are not open and honest with Social Security, they will use any little bit of positivity against you. You open the door for saying like, oh, I can do this, for them to come in and use that against you, not just at the initial application, but possibly at hearing 3 years later. And most of the time, they're only going to judge you based on pieces of paper. The people who make the decision are never going to see you. So you have to be very, very honest in what you write in the application. My God. Social Security doesn't understand HD, so just assume like they know nothing because they don't. I'm so nice. It is your responsibility to follow up with Social Security. They will not follow up with you. So if you are concerned something is missing, it is your responsibility to make sure they get it and advocate for yourself. Like I said at the beginning, you're going to spend every day for the rest of your life advocating. And that is true with Social Security as well. I thought I cut some of this stuff out. I apologize. Yeah, this is just general information about what to include, but yeah, it's best practices. Those are important. Best practices are really important. I was just trying to get through this. If you have questions, you can always contact me. And there are so many resources that I have created. If you scan this QR code that are on HDSA's website, there's YouTube, there's webinars that I've created that'll walk you like step by step through the online application. There's 25 webinars that live on our YouTube page that I have done about so many different aspects of the disability process: financial planning, legal planning, VA benefits and Social Security, JHD, and all of these things. So there's so many resources out there, but if you ever get hung up, if you ever need anything, you can just contact me directly. Thank you so much for sticking with this today. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad I got to come. Okay.